one of the things, my colleague, Dr. Gabrielle Line, and I always like to talk about is muscle-centric health, is that muscle is actually the primary tissue for insulin sensitivity, for carbohydrate, for diabetes control, for blood lipids, for fatty acid use, for your blood lipid content. So muscle is actually, it makes up around 50% of our body, certainly 50% of our protein, and it's really critical for not only functional mobility, but also metabolic health.
Well, let's get more into the nuances there. That's a topic I really want to delve into. And obviously, this will be a factor for people when they decide that they're going to take this on or not. This is a whole nother element that I think a lot of people don't think of when it comes to putting on muscle mass. A lot of people, I'm sure, think of being able to move their body and to lift heavy things, but the whole metabolic aspect is a whole nother element. So let's get into the weeds there.
Yeah. So muscle again makes up a very large part of your body composition, and it's a primary tissue for using carbohydrates, for example. Um, if you look at the body's use of carbohydrate, the brain uses some, the red blood use some, they're absolute glucose users. The kidney uses some. If you add that up, you get a number of about 80 grams of carbohydrate per day. And they put a safety value on top of that. And so we actually have an RDA for carbohydrates of 130 grams per day. In the United States, the average carbohydrate intake is 300. So 3 times the RDA. So where can we put that? People say, well, put it glycogen. Well, once your glycogen stores are putting, what are you going to do with it? So basically, the only tissue that really can burn it is muscle. And so then we can think about, how does muscle burn it? Well, it burns it with physical activity. And the range is from about 40 grams per hour up to about 70, depending on the intensity of the exercise. So if you put in an hour's worth of intense exercise every day, so we're talking heart rate above 120 type of range. If you put in an hour, you basically earn another 60 grams of carbohydrates per day. So now we've gone from 130 to 190, but we're still nowhere near 300. So basically, for people to justify 300 grams of carbohydrates per day, they have to put in 3 hours of intense exercise every day. Nobody's doing that, and that explains obesity and diabetes. We have to go no farther.
So there's two different mechanisms there that we can address. Obviously, putting carbs into the body, plus exercise, plus something you maybe were about to jump into, the fact that even on days when we're not working out, having extra muscle on the body is helpful for our metabolism besides the actual working out.
So, kind of filling in those blanks, the primary fuel that muscle likes is fats. Its preferred fuel is fatty acids. So you and I talking right now, our muscles should be burning somewhere near 80, maybe 90% coming from fatty acids. I just came back from the gym a little while ago playing tennis. That probably upped my use of carbohydrates because it's more intense. When we get above about 60%, 65% of our maximum exertion, the body has to switch over to carbohydrate use. But up till that point, if you go for a walk in the afternoon, your body should be using almost exclusively fats. So that gets us back to that carbohydrate use. Why do we need so much carbohydrate? The body has to either burn it or store it. Carbohydrates are somewhat dangerous, actually. In fact, they have their own disease. It's called diabetes. If carbohydrates, blood glucose, stays too high, we get damage to every organ in the body. So the body has to do something with it. Ideally, it will burn it, but if not, then it has to store it as fat. It has to convert it into fat. And we get all kinds of things. We see higher blood triglycerides, we see fatty liver, we see all of the negatives that go with diabetes because the body's now forced to convert carbohydrates into fat. And that's not a very efficient process, and the body doesn't like doing it. It complicates things. We have too much insulin required. Everything sort of starts becoming negative and inflammatory.
Okay, so it sounds like what we're looking for is this balance of moderating the carbs and putting on muscle to help with metabolism, the balance between the two.
Yeah. So when we teach it, particularly with people who are struggling with weight, we always teach it that your protein and carbohydrates are a 1-to-1 ratio. In the United States right now, it's about 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein. And so we're going to bring the carbohydrates down and the protein up, and we're targeting 1-to-1 ratio. If people do that, they generally find they can control their weight, and they'll also protect their muscles. And we're going to do it by bringing carbs down and bringing protein up. We're going to basically substitute carbs out and replace it with protein.
In the health world, when you hear people talking about upping protein in the diet, you often hear about the thermogenesis of increasing protein. And I know I've heard you debunk this myth. So let's talk about why.
No, that is absolutely correct.
Oh, I thought you've debunked. I've heard you on another show talk about nuance there, that it's not totally true. Okay, then talk about why it is true.
Yeah. So protein has a significantly higher thermogenic effect than either carbs or fat, for sure. So carbs and fat, about 5% of the energy is lost to heat, thermogenesis, and with protein, it's about 20%. People have argued, and what you've probably heard me debunk is what's the mechanism behind it.
That's what I'm getting
at. So the thermogenesis is 100% true, but the mechanism is wrong. What the freshman level nutrition textbooks would say is because of digestion, absorption, and metabolism, and that's not true at all. Protein and digestion absorption doesn't really cost any more than fat or something else. What's different is that protein stimulates muscle protein synthesis, and that is a very expensive energy process. Some people estimate that can account for 20% of our basal metabolism if you do it correctly. I'll give you an example. One of the ways we discovered it, we were looking at treadmill running in rodents. So we were using rodents as a way to study protein synthesis. We wanted a way to get protein synthesis to be inhibited really quickly. So we did exhaustive running in rats, drops protein synthesis, and that's kind of how we discovered a lot of the meal stuff, which we can get into. But what's important about it is we started measuring ATP, the energy and muscle, with that exercise. And then we started measuring it after a protein meal, and we found that the energy expenditure of a protein meal was about the same as an hour of running. That's the thermic effect of protein. It's protein synthesis in muscle. And so if you don't eat the correct amount of protein, if you don't eat it at the right times to get muscle effects, you won't see it, which is why there's some differentiation in the literature. Some people claim it's bigger or less than others. The issue is really how you eat your protein at meals.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
It's all about balance and ratios. And so again, you can do it. And there's vegetarians and vegans out there who are very skilled at it, but the average consumer has no clue.